January 17, 1944, the harbor of Truk Lagoon, a jewel of Japanese naval power, lay wrapped in morning mist. Sunlight glinted off anchored battleships, cruisers, and transports, their silhouettes mirrored in the still water. From the shore, officers walked the piers with an air of quiet confidence, assured that the surrounding reefs and minefields made this harbor untouchable. Beneath the water, a different story unfolded. In near silence, American submarines glided through narrow channels, careful to avoid patrols and depth charges. Sonar echoes bounced faintly, barely perceptible, yet every pulse was a harbinger of danger. Crew members inside the submarines worked with tense precision. Instruments flickering, charts spread across benches, eyes fixed on every blip. Japanese sailors above hummed songs and prepared breakfast, unaware that death could slip past the barriers they trusted. The Admirals, confident in their strategic haven, lingered on the deck, smoking, talking of supplies and future campaigns. In less than an hour, that silence, the arrogance of security would shatter. A hidden threat had already penetrated what was believed to be impregnable. The calm, confident harbor now teeters on the edge of disaster. By early 1944, the Pacific War had entered a decisive phase. From the Philippines to the Caroline Islands, and its navy remained one of the most formidable forces afloat. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The Imperial Japanese Navy had invested heavily in capital ships, focusing on battleships like the Yamato and Musashi, confident that fleet engagements would secure dominance. Harbors such as Truk Lagoon were considered safe havens, fortified with anti-submarine nets, mines, and patrols, thought to repel even the most daring attacks. Admirals surveyed their domains with calm authority, convinced that geography and engineering combined would make their fleets invulnerable. Meanwhile, the United States Navy had refined its submarine campaign. Since the early months of the war, American subs had learned to exploit weaknesses in Japanese logistics. Merchant shipping, troop transports, and even warships became prime targets. By 1943, U.S. submarines were no longer just raiders. They had become strategic instruments of attrition. Radar and torpedoes gave them a distinct edge over Japanese harbor defenses. Japanese confidence rested not only on physical defenses but on doctrine. Harbor security relied heavily on visual patrols, minefields, and the assumption that deep, narrow channels would prevent enemy vessels from entering undetected. Communications were centralized, and decisions were filtered through a strict chain of command. This rigidity would soon become a liability. Reinforced by natural reefs and shallow waters created an impenetrable fortress. Submarines had occasionally breached defensive perimeters, though these incidents were rare and often dismissed as flukes. The Americans studied these lessons meticulously, identifying patterns and gaps in patrol routines. And intercepted communications highlighted vulnerabilities in harbors that were assumed secure. Every detail, from tide charts to the timing of sentry shifts, was scrutinized to plan attacks that would bypass Japanese expectations entirely. The Pacific Campaign had demonstrated that controlling supply lines could cripple the Japanese war effort more effectively than any direct confrontation. They were now poised to strike at the very heart of Japanese naval power. Truk Lagoon, at the time the crown jewel of Japan's defensive network, would become the ultimate test. The lagoon's anchorage held carriers, cruisers, and transports, all deemed beyond reach. American commanders, however, knew that confidence often blinds even the most disciplined military minds. Sailors polished decks, prepared rations, and maintained engines. The complacency was not arrogance born of ignorance, but of long-standing doctrine, honed over decades of naval tradition. The same principles that had guided Japan to early victories against Allied forces' discipline, centralized command, and layered defenses now fostered overconfidence. Across the Pacific, American submariners were taking every precaution. The mindset was precise and patient. Every detail could decide life or death. As the submarines closed in on their targets, the stage was set for a confrontation where stealth and surprise would outweigh numbers, firepower, and fortifications. And the lessons would reverberate across the Pacific theater. The calm confidence of Japanese harbors now teeters on the edge of exposure, setting the stage for the vulnerabilities American submarines would exploit. Truk Lagoon, located in the Central Caroline Islands, was the centerpiece of Japan's defensive network in the Pacific. Often called the Gibraltar of the Pacific by Japanese officers, its natural reefs, shallow passages, and complex channels were believed to make any naval intrusion nearly impossible. Anchored within the lagoon were dozens of capital ships, including battleships, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and supply transports, along with hundreds of support vessels. Admiral Masami Kobayashi, the officer responsible for the lagoon's security, maintained a layered defense of minefields, anti-submarine nets, and patrolling destroyers. Japanese intelligence believed their greatest vulnerability was from surface raiders or air attacks, not stealthy submarines. It would be detected and neutralized before achieving significant results. Sonar installations probed the channels, and patrol boats circled in predictable patterns. Admirals, confident in these systems, allowed crews to maintain a sense of normalcy, believing that security was absolute. Yet beneath this surface of confidence, subtle weaknesses existed. Patrol routines were rigid, often following the same paths at the same times, creating exploitable predictability. Anti-submarine nets had gaps for friendly ship movement, and sonar coverage was uneven. Historical reports had shown the occasional submarine penetration. The Americans had carefully studied these vulnerabilities. U.S. Navy intelligence relied on a combination of intercepted communications, decrypted codes, and reconnaissance reports from aerial and submarine scouting missions. By mid-January 1944, a coordinated campaign of submarine harassment was underway. The U.S. submarines assigned to the operation were equipped with the latest Mark 14 torpedoes and had crews trained in stealthy night maneuvers, quiet engines, and precise torpedo targeting. American commanders emphasized patience. Any misstep could result in detection, depth charging, or total mission failure. Every inch of navigable water was accounted for. Japanese command structures, meanwhile, emphasized centralized decision-making. Admiral Kobayashi and his staff relied on reports from patrols and sentries before issuing orders. Local commanders had little discretion to act independently, which slowed reaction times in case of an unexpected intrusion. Furthermore, Japanese doctrine did not fully account for underwater threats operating silently and invisibly. The reliance on visual detection, combined with static anti-submarine measures, created a false sense of security. Other harbors across the Pacific faced similar vulnerabilities. Rabaul, Truk, and Palau, among others, were considered strongholds. Yet each had predictable defense patterns and gaps in anti-submarine coverage. U.S. naval planners saw these harbors as opportunities not only to sink ships but to deliver a psychological blow. Success in these locations would demonstrate that no harbor, no matter how fortified, was entirely safe from the reach of the U.S. submarine fleet. The human dimension was equally important. Japanese sailors and officers, though disciplined, lived in a world of routine and habit. Daily drills, inspections, and ceremonial protocols reinforced their sense of order. They could not conceive of an enemy slipping past the visible defenses without detection. Conversely, American submariners thrived on exploiting that predictability. They trained not only in navigation and torpedo firing, but in the patience and composure required to remain invisible in confined, dangerous waters. By the eve of the operation, both sides were locked in a quiet tension. Japanese admirals believed their harbors were safe, their defenses impregnable. American submariners, however, moved silently into position, confident that months of intelligence gathering and meticulous preparation would allow them to strike where their enemy felt untouchable. This convergence of confidence and stealth would soon determine the fate of some of Japan's most prized vessels, and the reactions of the admirals would be nothing short of stunned silence. The stage is now set, harbors deemed secure, defenses in place, yet vulnerabilities exploited by American submarines. Inside Truk Lagoon, the human element of war was a delicate balance between discipline and complacency. Sailors polished decks, prepared equipment, and carried out routines that had become almost ritualistic. The reliance on rigid routines, combined with trust in the fortress-like harbor, meant that human error or misjudgment could have catastrophic consequences. Panic spread quickly in the confined spaces of the ships, orders conflicted, and the calm authority of admirals was tested as they faced an unseen, unpredictable threat. The psychological shock of realizing that stealthy intruders could navigate past all layers of protection would later be described in Japanese reports as a silence heavier. From a tactical standpoint, Truk Lagoon and similar harbors were masterpieces of static defense. Mines were laid along the main channels, nets were strung to block larger vessels, and patrol boats continuously circled entry points. However, these measures were designed to counter surface attacks, not submarines capable of slow, silent navigation through narrow channels. The Americans studied these patterns meticulously. By observing patrol routes, timing of depth charge drills, and the positions of mines and nets, submarine commanders identified exploitable gaps. Night movements, tidal shifts, and the slow pace of visual observation allowed submarines to infiltrate without detection. Patient underwater attackers was a key factor in the surprise successes of American operations. The technological edge of the U.S. submarines was decisive. By 1944, American submarines were equipped with advanced sonar, periscopes optimized for night observation, and torpedoes with improved magnetic and contact detonators. Engine modifications allowed quieter operation, reducing the chances of detection in the shallow waters of harbors. On the Japanese side, anti-submarine technologies were rudimentary by comparison. Sonar coverage was uneven. Depth charge effectiveness limited, and visual spotting remained the primary detection method. The combination of advanced American technology and predictable Japanese defenses created a lethal environment. Submarine crews could approach within striking distance of major vessels, often unnoticed until the first torpedo struck. These three angles, human, tactical, and technological, together explain why harbors believed to be secure became sites of vulnerability. The confidence of Japanese crews, the rigidity of their defensive routines, the success of these operations would not be measured solely in tonnage sunk, but in the shock inflicted upon Japanese command, demonstrating that even the most fortified positions could no longer guarantee safety. The stage is now set for the next layer: leadership, enemy perspective, and psychological consequences. Admirals overseeing harbors like Truk Lagoon were accustomed to controlling vast fleets from secure positions. Their decisions were guided by doctrine, experience, and a rigid chain of command. Yet the sudden intrusion of American submarines challenged this authority in ways no drill could prepare them for. Reports of torpedo strikes arrived sporadically, sometimes delayed or incomplete, forcing commanders to make split-second decisions with incomplete information. The tension was palpable. Some admirals attempted to coordinate counterattacks, sending destroyers in pursuit of the unseen enemy, only to find the submarines had vanished into the channels. The stress tested both professional skill and personal composure. Historical diaries and reports note moments of stunned silence among senior officers, a rare human reaction in the disciplined world of Japanese naval command. These pauses, however brief, reflected the unsettling realization that no harbor leadership in this context was as much about improvisation as it was about pre-planned strategy. From the American viewpoint, these operations represented a culmination of intelligence, training, and daring. Submarine commanders approached the lagoon with meticulous patience, aware that even a single misstep could be fatal. Every maneuver adjusting depth, timing the periscope rise, aligning a torpedo shot was calculated. They knew that the psychological impact of striking deep within enemy territory could be as powerful as the physical damage. Crews operated in tight, claustrophobic spaces, each man aware that their success depended on absolute precision and silence. Reports from post-war American accounts emphasize the combination of bravery, technical mastery, and discipline required to penetrate supposedly impregnable harbors. These actions, executed with near-surgical precision, were a testament to the evolving doctrine of submarine warfare. The psychological dimension of these operations cannot be overstated. Where engagements followed recognizable patterns, the invasion of the harbor appended these expectations. Panic and confusion spread quickly among crews. Orders conflicted, weapons were deployed in haste, and even seasoned officers struggled to maintain command. For the American side, the moral dimension was reversed. Successful infiltration reinforced faith in training, technology, and doctrine. The knowledge that stealth and intelligence could overcome size and fortification bolstered morale across submarine crews and their commanders. This psychological asymmetry, the terror of the unexpected for one side, the confidence of calculated risk for the other, was a defining factor in the strategic impact of these attacks. Beyond individual reactions, the broader lesson became clear. Even the most heavily defended points in the Pacific were vulnerable to asymmetric threats. Japanese doctrine had emphasized visible strength, layered defenses, and centralized command. But these very traits created predictable patterns exploitable by smaller, mobile, and stealthy forces. The American approach combined intelligence, technology, and audacity to convert weaknesses into strategic opportunities. By penetrating harbors like Truk, the U.S. Navy demonstrated that control over supply lines and command centers could shift the balance of power without requiring direct, large-scale fleet engagement. In essence, these operations redefined the concept of naval security in the Pacific. The combination of leadership under pressure, enemy ingenuity, and psychological shock explains how a small number of submarines could achieve disproportionately large effects. These angles, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and moral, set the stage for the decisive moment, the climax, turning point, where harbors previously thought safe would be irrevocably shattered. January 17, 1944. The dawn light over Truk Lagoon revealed the outlines of Japan's pride. Battleships, carriers, cruisers, and transports anchored in rows along the reefs. Admirals walked the decks with confidence, inspecting crews and equipment. Beneath the calm water, American submarines had already entered the lagoon. In the darkness of the channels, crews monitored depth gauges and sonar readings, hearts steady despite the confined, perilous environment. Every maneuver was deliberate. The first target, the heavy cruiser Mogami, lay at anchor near the northern pier. From 500 meters away, torpedoes were readied, fired in sequence to maximize impact. Moments later, a muffled explosion erupted beneath the hull. Sailors scrambled in disbelief. Orders collided as damage control teams rushed to assess the devastation. Panic spread among nearby vessels. Destroyers attempted to locate the source of the attack, dropping depth charges into empty water. Torpedoes struck a transport ship, and flames began to lick the hull of a second cruiser. Smoke billowed, black against the morning sky, as Japanese crews realized that the enemy had penetrated the very heart of their supposedly secure harbor. Admirals, initially frozen in disbelief, now scrambled to organize defensive measures. Communications were overwhelmed with fragmented reports, his hand trembling as he attempted to coordinate a counterattack. The speed and precision of the submarine assault defied expectation. Orders issued to nearby destroyers often arrived too late. By the time pursuit began, the American submarines had vanished into channels too narrow or treacherous for surface ships to follow safely. The tactical advantage of stealth was absolute. Depth charges shook the water but failed to inflict damage, while torpedoes continued to find their marks with alarming accuracy. The American crews demonstrated not only technical mastery, but psychological control, exploiting fear and confusion in the enemy ranks. Sailors clung to rails, some shouting for help, others attempting to fight the fires consuming their ships. Smoke and explosions merged with the sound of alarms and frantic commands, creating a scene of chaotic intensity. Within less than an hour, several major vessels had been crippled. The Japanese command, paralyzed by the unexpected precision of the attacks, struggled to comprehend how submarines could navigate the reefs, avoid patrols, and strike from multiple angles. Conflicting reports and the sheer unpredictability of the enemy's approach compounded their confusion. Even experienced officers, trained for wartime improvisation, found themselves paralyzed by the unprecedented nature of the assault. By mid-morning, the first phase of the operation concluded. Submarines retreated to hidden positions, waiting for the next opportunity, leaving behind a harbor transformed from a symbol of Japanese naval dominance into a scene of vulnerability and panic. Fires burned unchecked, crew members worked desperately to contain flooding, and the once pristine calm of Truk Lagoon had become a tableau of confusion and destruction. The first wave had shattered assumptions. Confidence in harbor defenses had proven fragile. Japanese admirals, stunned into silence, confronted a reality where stealth, intelligence, and precise execution could overturn even the strongest fortifications. Smoke and flames rose from multiple anchorages, painting a grim portrait of vulnerability. Fires from torpedoed ships spread rapidly, feeding on fuel stores and wooden decks. Many of them, unarmed for battle at dawn, scrambled to contain the damage, tossing buckets, activating pumps, and struggling to maintain any semblance of order amid the chaos. The American submarines, fully aware of the havoc they had unleashed, prepared for a second strike. Maneuvering through narrow channels and shallow waters with meticulous precision, they targeted vessels that had not yet been hit. A light cruiser, previously anchored near the lagoon's eastern pier, exploded in a series of torpedo detonations. Smaller support ships were disabled or sunk outright, their crews thrown into the water in desperate attempts to survive. Every strike was calculated to maximize psychological shock as well as physical damage. The Japanese command, still struggling to reconcile the speed and accuracy of the attacks with their assumptions of harbor security, was now in complete disarray. Admirals attempted to coordinate a counteroffensive. Destroyers sped toward the suspected submarine positions. Dropping depth charges in arcs meant to corral the hidden attackers. Yet the American crews had already anticipated these maneuvers. Submarines slipped past nets, dodged patrols, and repositioned for successive attacks. The clash was almost entirely invisible. Above water, chaos reigned, while beneath, calm, sailors leapt from decks as explosions rocked their ships. Officers shouted orders that could not be executed in time. Damage control teams worked frantically to contain flooding, their efforts hindered by smoke, fire, and structural collapse. The sight of ships once deemed untouchable now burning or sinking struck fear into the hearts of even seasoned crews. For the Japanese admirals, this was not merely a tactical defeat but a moment that challenged their fundamental understanding of naval security. From the American perspective, the operation had achieved precisely what intelligence and planning had predicted. Each torpedo strike, each narrowly executed maneuver, validated months of reconnaissance and careful study of Japanese defensive patterns. Submarine crews remained calm, operating in near-complete silence, understanding that their effectiveness relied on remaining unseen and unpredictable. Ensuring that survivors and commanders alike would remember the attack as a demonstration of both skill and audacity. By late morning, the first wave of chaos began to subside. Fires continued to burn and several vessels listed heavily, some partially submerged. Reports described ships damaged beyond repair, crew casualties rising, and a sudden urgent need to revise defensive strategies. The intrusion of a few submarines had inflicted damage far exceeding what conventional calculations had predicted, proving that intelligence-driven, stealthy operations could redefine the battlefield. The aftermath of this turning point extended beyond material loss. The psychological shock to Japanese command was immediate and lasting. Admirals who had once walked the piers with quiet authority now faced uncertainty and fear. Confidence in doctrine and harbor defenses had been deeply undermined. Crews questioned their routines, officers revised strategies, and a new awareness of vulnerability spread across the fleet. For the Americans, the success reinforced faith in intelligence-driven warfare, training, and technological superiority. The ability to strike decisively inside enemy strongholds had proven both practical and transformative. By midday, the harbor, once a symbol of Japanese naval invulnerability, had become a testament to the power of stealth, intelligence, and preparation. The silence that had dominated the morning was replaced with fire, smoke, and urgent command activity. Japanese admirals, stunned into reflection, confronted a reality they had not anticipated. No harbor, no matter how fortified or geographically protected, could withstand the precise, patient, and daring operations of a skilled submarine force. The decisive moment of the harbor attack concluded, leaving Truk Lagoon crippled and Japanese command shaken. This catastrophic breach set the stage for examining the aftermath, including strategic consequences, loss assessments, and long-term psychological impacts. The morning of January 17, 1944, fires continued to consume torpedoed vessels, black smoke rising high above the water, a stark visual testament to the sudden vulnerability of a harbor long believed impregnable. Japanese damage reports recorded multiple capital ships struck, including cruisers and transports, with several severely damaged or sunk outright. The human toll was significant. Hundreds of sailors and officers were killed or wounded, while survivors faced the harrowing task of damage control amid chaos. Admirals and officers were forced into emergency councils to assess losses and implement contingency measures. Became congested with fragmented and often contradictory reports. Reinforcement of anti-submarine nets and acceleration of mine-laying operations. Yet these measures could do little to reverse the immediate material and psychological damage inflicted by the intruding submarines. The operational consequences extended beyond Truk. Japanese naval planners recognized that if American submarines could penetrate their crown jewel, other harbors and supply points might also be at risk. Ships deemed safe within anchorages now required constant vigilance, and the sense of invulnerability that had guided Japanese strategy evaporated almost overnight. Morale among crews suffered as rumors of unseen intruders and unexpected losses spread through the fleet. Commanders who had relied on doctrine and fixed defenses were confronted with the reality that stealth and intelligence could nullify traditional security measures. American reports emphasized the efficiency and precision of the attacks. Submarine crews executed operations with minimal exposure, avoiding patrols, mines, and depth charges while striking multiple targets in rapid succession. Post-war assessments highlighted how months of intelligence gathering, code-breaking, reconnaissance, and intercepted communications combined with rigorous training allowed the U.S. Navy to achieve disproportionate effect. The operation demonstrated that psychological impact could rival physical damage in shaping the course of naval operations. The loss of ships was not merely material but strategic. Several cruisers and transports were rendered combat ineffective for months, complicating Japanese plans for troop movements, supply runs, and reinforcement of positions across the Pacific. Critical supply chains were disrupted, creating shortages in forward areas and forcing Japanese command to divert resources to rebuild or replace lost vessels. Admirals had to consider not only the immediate tactical setback but also the cascading operational effects that would ripple across the theater. Even the survivors of the attack felt the psychological weight. Sailors who had believed in the harbor's safety were forced to confront the reality of vulnerability in a modern naval war. The surprise, precision, and invisibility of the submarine strikes created a new layer of fear and uncertainty. Crews spent hours repairing ships, fighting fires, and tending to wounded comrades. Yet the knowledge lingered that at any moment, stealthy adversaries could reappear. The combination of loss, disruption, and uncertainty reshaped the operational mindset of both officers and enlisted personnel. By the end of the first day, Truk Lagoon had shifted from a bastion of Japanese confidence to a warning for the entire Pacific theater. The attack illustrated that even the most fortified harbors were vulnerable to patient, intelligent, and technologically advanced adversaries. The material losses, while severe, were magnified by the psychological and operational consequences. Japanese admirals, stunned into reflection, faced the difficult task of restoring both defensive integrity and morale in a fleet suddenly made aware of its own fragility. The first stage of the aftermath established the immediate material and human costs, while revealing the long-term strategic implications for Japanese operations. In the days following the attack on Truk Lagoon, the repercussions rippled far beyond the immediate destruction of ships and crews. Japanese Naval Command faced a crisis of confidence. Admirals who had once walked the piers with authority now questioned the very foundations of their doctrine. Reports described officers stunned into silence, not from a lack of courage, but from the realization that stealth and intelligence could penetrate what had been considered inviolable. The psychological shock was profound. The notion that no harbor was truly safe reshaped operational thinking, forcing a reconsideration of patrol routines, defensive deployments, and risk assessments across the Pacific. Operationally, the loss of key vessels disrupted Japanese logistics and fleet readiness. Cruisers and transports destroyed or incapacitated in Truk could no longer support troop movements, supply runs, or reinforcements to contested areas. Plans for future offensives were delayed or modified, and resources had to be redirected to repair docks, salvage operations, and replacement vessels. The attack exposed a critical vulnerability. Static defenses, though formidable on paper, were ill-suited to counter an agile and technologically capable adversary operating from unexpected vectors. Commanders across the Pacific were forced to accept that their strategic strongholds were no longer guarantees of safety. The Americans, by contrast, capitalized on both material and psychological victories. Submarine crews returned to base with high morale, their success reinforcing faith in training, intelligence, and technology. Reports emphasized that the attacks achieved disproportionate effects relative to the number of submarines involved. A handful of skilled vessels had struck multiple targets, inflicted casualties, and undermined Japanese confidence in one of their most critical naval hubs. The operation demonstrated that patience, preparation, and precision could offset numerical disadvantage, reshaping the approach to naval warfare in the Pacific. At the human level, Japanese sailors grappled with the aftermath of fear and uncertainty. Witnesses described exhausted crews struggling to maintain damaged ships, while officers attempted to organize rescue and firefighting operations amid smoke, twisted metal, and rising casualties. For many, the sudden vulnerability of previously secure ships was a harrowing lesson in the limits of traditional naval doctrine. Survivors' diaries and post-war interviews highlight the lasting impact: confidence eroded, routines disrupted, and a pervasive awareness that the enemy could strike anywhere at any time. This psychological effect extended beyond the harbor. It altered morale fleet-wide and influenced future defensive decisions. Strategically, the attacks forced Japanese planners to reconsider harbor defenses throughout the Pacific. Anti-submarine measures were expanded, patrol patterns made less predictable, and greater emphasis was placed on mobile response units rather than static fortifications. Nevertheless, the inherent advantage of the success of Truk demonstrated a fundamental shift. The decisive factor in naval security was no longer size, firepower, or natural geography. By the end of the week, the operational landscape had changed. American submarines had proven their ability to strike deep into Japanese strongholds, forcing a strategic recalibration that extended across the Pacific theater. Truk Lagoon, once regarded as the jewel of Japan's defensive network, became a cautionary symbol of overconfidence and the dangers of predictable security measures. Japanese admirals, shaken by the breach, initiated sweeping reviews of protocols, yet the memory of that morning ships exploding, sailors in panic, and the silent enemy vanishing into the channels lingered. It was a lesson in vulnerability and adaptability that would influence naval operations for the remainder of the war. The destruction, disruption, and psychological impact of the harbor attacks were profound, setting the stage for a calm yet reflective examination of what these events meant in the broader context of naval warfare.